We recently learned that a U.S. Court of Appeals sided with Grayscale over the SEC in the closely watched Bitcoin ETF case. The District of Columbia Court of Appeals essentially paved the way for Bitcoin exchange traded funds. What's your reaction to that ruling, and what do you think the implications are for the industry?
This is incredibly exciting, and it's a long time coming. ETFs are available today in other countries, in Canada and even in Europe. So it would be great for this to be available in the US. And what it represents to the industry is a gateway for new segments of participants in the market. And not, by the way, not fly-by-night organizations. The most serious and significant asset management companies in the world have applied for an ETF. And if this is another step towards their approval, that will just be a game changer.
How do you think this whole thing will pan out? Do you think spot Bitcoin ETFs will be approved right now? There's applications from places like BlackRock, Wisdom Tree. How do you think this whole situation will pan out from here on out?
Yeah, I'm really encouraged. I've been wrong before when it comes to the SEC and particularly their timetables, but I am encouraged. I do believe we'll get there. I do believe there's enough validation just by virtue of the fact of the names that have applied. As I mentioned, these are the most sophisticated investors in the world. They obviously believe that there's an important market there for their customers. And I believe the SEC is supportive of good business. They just want to make sure it's safe. And we assume that as they progress through their process, they'll come to that conclusion that it is safe and it is valid and it is important for U.S. consumers.
Well, it certainly will be very interesting to see what transpires. But last week, we learned that Bitstamp plans to stop Ether staking in the United States because of the quote, current regulatory dynamics. Can you expand on what prompted the move and why now? Did the settlement between your rival Kraken and the SEC have anything to do with it? I mean, in February, the crypto firm said it was shuttering its US staking operation after the SEC said Kraken failed to register the offer and sale of the digital asset staking as a service program. Did that serve as an eye opener for you, perhaps?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of factors here. The first one is, as you may know, Bitstamp is the longest running cryptocurrency exchange. We're also the most regulated and we feel the most compliant forward and therefore trusted in the marketplace. We've got 12 years of track record. We were the first to ever have a license. We're the only exchange that has 7 years of clean audit opinions from a big four accounting firm. We've endeavored to be kind of the poster child for trust and regulated opportunities for participants. So with that reputation, when we do bring an offering to market, it's viewed as a seal of approval, if you will, by many in the marketplace, and we take that very seriously. So we monitor the regulatory landscape very, very closely, and we make judgments based on what we're seeing. And in this particular case, staking is there's a lot of nuances to how offerings are constructed. And for instance, our staking offering was quite different from some of the others in the market, including Kraken. However, we thought that the smart thing to do here as this plays out is to, make sure that we're on the sideline and observing and learning based on what regulators are doing and how the market is responding versus on the field of play going against regulators, perhaps.
So I take it the backdrop of a regulatory crackdown did in fact have something to do with your decision.
Absolutely. We take regulator actions at face value. There's a lot of rhetoric out there that we try not to over-index on. But when a regulator takes an action against a company in the marketplace, we tend to take that at face value and we think, okay, so what is the most trusted play here for the marketplace and for Bitstamp? And unfortunately, in this case, we decided to temporarily halt this staking offering, which I think is a wonderful offering. We hope it'll be quite temporary, but we have to see how the environment is going to play out.
Earlier this month, Bitstamp said it would halt US trading for 7 crypto tokens, including Solana's Sol token and Polygon's Matic token, citing recent developments for the move. Can you expand on that? I mean, the SEC named those tokens as securities in the agency's lawsuits against Binance and Coinbase. So, did that have anything to do with your decision?
It did. It did. This falls into a similar category where we're monitoring the actions of not just the SEC but regulators in general, and we think that they've raised some questions about some specific tokens, and we'd like to further explore those. But we don't want to explore them from a perspective of full participation. We'd rather kind of do our analysis on the sideline. The one of the important considerations here is as we have studied tokens, and again, we have a very rigorous and comprehensive framework that we're operating from. We've looked closely at the tokens the SEC has identified, and we have yet to come up with a pattern, or a rhyme or reason why why these particular tokens are named. And for that reason, we need to learn more. Basically, we need to learn more. We're not going to automatically assume the SEC is wrong, and we're not going to automatically assume that we're right, but rather we're going to take a step back and make sure that when we list or continue to list, it's with the utmost confidence.
So you touched on this, but overall, how is Bitstamp operating in the US amid the current environment, especially given the lack of regulatory clarity here? What steps are you taking to make sure you're in compliance with the current laws here in America?
Yeah, well, we invest quite heavily in this topic, and as many do in this space. But for Bitstamp globally, it's about a third of all of our human resources that are applied to compliance, risk, legal type analyses, and making sure that what we bring to market is absolutely valid and trustworthy. And so we'll continue to do that. In the U.S. in particular, I'm encouraged by some of the legislative action that we've seen in the last few months. There's about 4 bills that have progressed out of committee, and stand a shot of working through the rest of the legislative process. We think that level of clarity is absolutely necessary. And for Bitstamp, we're also comforted by the fact that our primary market is Europe. So that's our primary base of business. And in Europe, the regulatory landscape is quite different, and it's becoming much clearer with the MiCA framework and other things. And we're seeing that in terms of inflow of new business in Europe. And we hope the same will happen in the US and not in the not too distant future.
As we noted earlier, the SEC filed lawsuits against Binance and Coinbase back in June. What was your reaction to the lawsuits against those major crypto exchanges?
Yeah, well, they're two very different situations. First of all, Coinbase is a publicly traded company. They have always, at least from the outside looking in, been on the side of common sense regulation. But there's a difference of opinion regarding the nature of cryptocurrencies, and they're a bit caught up in it. But I think that their arguments are very, very strong, and I commend them for what they're doing to try to make sure that there's a legitimate and complete kind of discussion and decision making around cryptocurrencies, not just driven by one regulatory agency or one market participant. On the Binance side, very different, right? So this is primarily an offshore exchange. From the outside looking in, I don't believe that they've invested in compliance to the extent the rest of us have, and they've enjoyed kind of an uneven playing field in that regard. So I'm not happy to see action against anyone in the crypto space, but I think they're starting from a very different place than Coinbase, and of course the allegations are quite different as well. So yeah, curious to see how they both play out, but hopefully in a positive way for the overall ecosystem.
What's your overall take on the SEC's approach of regulation by enforcement?
Yeah, it's tough. It's quite challenging. Bitstamp, as you've heard me say, we just want to do everything correctly. We always lead from a regulatory standpoint, and as we've grown our business over 12 years, we first get all the licenses. We first get our compliance processes completely burned in, and then we try to grow the business. And when the rules are not clear, it becomes a dubious business model, and some others, some offshore players, for instance, really benefit. And I don't think, in terms of consumer protection, that's really effective. So I hope that as the situation evolves, and it's not just the SEC, but as the regulators work with Congress to really come up with a framework that makes sense, it will be more principles based and not litigious or litigation based enforcement.
So it's been more than 9 months since FTX filed for bankruptcy. And of course, the collapse of that crypto exchange caused an erosion of trust. What are you doing to make sure your customer assets are safe?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the FTX situation sent shockwaves through the industry, and I think what you had there was fraud, pure and simple. I think it's they want some of the perpetrators want to misconstrue that into some more industry specific situation, but it's just fraud. From a Bitstamp perspective, we haven't had to change any of our practices because we're very, very solidly on the right side of that bright line. Having said that, what we are seeing in our markets is increased adoption amongst institutions. So corporate onboarding on Bitstamp has gone up about 38% in the first half of 2023 versus the second half of 2022. And we believe that's a flight to quality, pure and simple. Coming out of FTX, people all of a sudden are being a little bit more thoughtful about who they partner with and what the regulatory and licensing is of those entities, and we're a beneficiary of that. And similarly, on the retail side, we're seeing growth, albeit in a tough marketplace, in terms of retail onboards, and that's very encouraging.
What are you focused on now at Bitstamp in the US? What can people expect? And will you be offering any other products or services to compensate for the loss of revenue from the discontinuation of Ether staking in the US?
Yeah, absolutely. We still have a very ambitious agenda in the US and globally from a product standpoint. And then we're going to continue to rely on our core strengths. So again, we think we're unparalleled in terms of compliance and trust. We also think we have the best customer service in the business, right? Many crypto companies operate more like a tech company where it's impossible to talk to somebody, and they don't really want to hear from you. But at Bitstamp, you can get to a live person in, on average, 22 seconds. You can get help where you need it, and this is particularly useful as new entrants come into the marketplace. One of the things that we've also done to make it easier for people to get involved is we want new participants to feel confident. So we have a Learn Center on our website with several hundred really, really useful articles about everything from tokens to companies to key players to regulation. And we think that exposing more people to content and to insight will help them operate with confidence. And that's ultimately what we're about.
Let's turn to markets. What's your take on what's happening with crypto prices right now? We've all watched the slump in prices recently, but what do you think was driving the recent selling pressure?
Well, there's tremendous headwinds for not just the crypto market, but for markets in general in the world, as you well know. I mean, everything from macroeconomic stuff and inflation to socioeconomic stuff and political unrest and all of this. 2023 has been an interesting year, and then on the crypto marketplace, there's additional headwinds in the form of the banking challenges from earlier in this year coming out, the FTX situation, and then the regulatory uncertainty that we've talked about. All of these things are a bit of a drag on the marketplace. And if you look at it in that context, and this might be a bit glass half full for you, but I'm quite amazed at how resilient the price of Bitcoin has been, and other cryptocurrencies, but primarily Bitcoin during this period. It's still up 61% or something from the beginning of the year. And there's not many assets around that can kind of speak to that resilience. And then the recent news related to ETFs, I think, has been a real boost and a trigger that we've needed. That has shown some great strength in the Bitcoin price, maybe up about 5%, I think, over the last day or so.